Sidebar. Yeah, that's much better. Okay, cool. So we're recording now, folks. I'm going to screen share for just a few minutes, but again, please open up that document, that file. Sorry, no, I don't want that. Okay, entire screen. You'd think I would get it by now, but share. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Cool, thanks. All right, folks, so just to remind you, you opened up the file and it looks like this. This is a full-on breakdown of the DBQ from 2017. So that was the second year I taught the class. So what I want you guys to do is scroll down to page 6. We've already looked at the documents before. I know not all of you did the practice DBQ, but a lot of you have seen this. So we don't really need to spend a lot of time talking about the documents. You guys, this DBQ was asking you to essentially analyze the extent of change and ideas about independence that British colonists experienced in North America. You had to lead the grader through the end of salutary neglect, all the way through the initial protests and boycotts while they're getting a little bit more radical, all the way up until the Continental Congress and the decision to break away and declare independence through the war. So again, we did this during the year, so we shouldn't have to spend too much time on it. But I want you to first see number 7. I'm sorry, page number 6. Actually, sorry, scroll down. You know what? I'm going to start on something different. Scroll down here, guys. Let's just forget reading the analysis provided by them. Let's just read the actual essay that this student wrote. So instead of starting on 6, sorry for that false start, start on page 13. It looks like this. I just want to read the words. These are real, actual student answers that College Board has put out. So instead of trying to like break down all their fancy language and analysis, let's literally read the essay the student wrote and figure out what we like about it and what we don't. Remember what the rubric looks like. We should be able to get 2 points probably in that first paragraph, the thesis point and the historical context. It doesn't have to be located there, but that's the easiest place, the most logical place to put it. So look at this. Finally, someone who writes in cursive that we can read. So guys, I'm going to do a little bit of narration and I'm going to try to keep this to about 35 minutes today. So let's just jump right into it. Here we go. Page 13. This is the first sample DBQ. Following the French and Indian War of 1754 to 1763, the British and the colonists found themselves facing new heightened problems that demanded immediate solutions. That could be some good context. As a response to their accumulations of a new and massive debt, the English ended this period of salutary neglect on their colonies, which provoked strong antagonism from the colonial people who had become accustomed to a greater source of freedom. That's a great description of salutary neglect, guys. I would give that the context point right there, but they're going to keep going on. Let's see what else they do. So they've clearly described the growing agitation because salutary neglect has come to an end. Although most colonists identified in the beginning of the American Revolution as part of the British people and only sought greater representation, the continued contention over economic policies and political autonomy forced many colonists to strike for a new identity as an independent nation. You can't write a better paragraph than this, folks, especially one that you were surprised on the prompt for and you didn't have time to prepare for. That is a perfect example of historical context. They're setting the stage. Remember, they need to talk about the years prior to the essay prompt. And we know the years prior to this are the 7 Years' War, and we know that's the end of salutary neglect. They've covered that fully. They've got like 4 sentences on salutary neglect. Their thesis is also here, guys. Their thesis is the last couple sentences of this paragraph. Let's look at it again. It starts with the word although. Although most colonists identified in the beginning of the American Revolution as part of the British people and only sought greater representation, the continued contention over economic policies and political autonomy forced many colonists to strike for a new identity as a new independent America. They're not saying that, the Americans are ready to break away from the get-go. They're saying it's an evolutionary process, which we know is true. Can someone answer me this? Does your thesis have to be accurate to get the point, or does it just have to be a claim?
It just has to be a claim.
Yeah, just has to be a claim, folks. This is not only a claim, it's a super accurate claim. This is not only, that good. We're good on that. We can move on. That gets 2 points right off the back, folks. Now let's scroll down here real quick to page, well, actually we'll do that at the end. We'll read the whole essay first before we read all the comments about it. But we already know they've got 2 points in that first paragraph. Let's see how they use the documents, how many they use, and so forth. In the early half of 1763 to 83, the British colonists viewed themselves as British people. They crossed all that out. For example, many religious leaders attempted to keep their congregations from revolting against Britain. Document 4. That's the proper way to cite something, folks. They've essentially summarized what the document has said with their little bit of analysis point. Basically, they've highlighted the point of view of the document, and then they just put in parentheses, document 4. Due to the First Great Awakening, there was a conflict between the Old Lights and the New Lights. The Old Lights were the religious leaders who sought to maintain the social order that was attacked by the New Lights, who attempted to question authority. The Quaker leaders did not want this questioning of the political authority of Britain to apply to the questioning of their over religious authority. Another example of the continued identification as British colonists can be seen amongst the high-class citizens of the South. Document 5. Now, I don't have the documents pulled up with me, folks. We could open those up and keep cross-referencing back them, but I'm telling you right now, they are using these documents appropriately. If we weren't sure, we would need to look back at the documents and be like, wait, is that really what it's saying? I'm trying to save you some time here. I'm telling you they use that document appropriately. They interpreted it correctly. So their point that they're trying to make, first off, folks, is part of their thesis. Remember, they said in their thesis, we're loyal British subjects. It's only over time that we're going to want to break away. They've got to prove that. Everything they say has got to prove that we start as loyal British subjects and we're simply going to develop this new sense of identity over a period of time. They're starting off their essay by saying we're loyal British colonists during the First Great Awakening, and then they go down here to talk about Southern colonists maintaining their British identity. Lady Schwann writes from the perspective of an upper class status in the Southern colonies. Southern colonies tend to have class ties with the British crown as colonists under direct royal rule or proprietorships. That's perfect, guys. I don't know if you remember the proprietary colonies, but the Carolinas, those are all proprietary colonies. Those are royal gifts from the crown to a loyal English subject. Same with Pennsylvania. Remember, Pennsylvania is a proprietary colony as well. Cool. In addition to those calls for maintained loyalty to the British crown, the goals of the First Continental Congress directly illustrate the lack of calls for American independence. Guys, everything they said so far is how we're loyal British subjects, essentially. Even at the First Continental Congress, we're not calling for independence. That's what they're highlighting here. First Continental Congress was mostly an attempt to deal with the Stamp Act and the Intolerable Acts by supporting the economic boycotts of incidents such as the Suffolk Resolves, I don't even know what that is, and the formation of the association. Those are boycott associations. The individuals of the Congress were not calling for American independence yet, though many members go on to support the patriot cause only 1 or 2 years later. They merely sought economic reform and reaction and redaction of certain acts. Lastly, even as late as 1776, many colonists still approved, or appeased, I don't know, I can't read that word, many colonists still opposed revolution as a costly and unnecessary hassle that would only hurt the American colonies in the long run. And they used document 6. So far, guys, they've used document 6 right here. They have used document 5. They have used document 4. So far, they've used 3 documents properly that help the reader understand that we are loyal British subjects and we're not trying to break away right away. It's only over time. So we're down to document 6. For context, it's important to remember that the colonists that won American freedom from Britain will only ever rise to about 40% in this time period. Patriots will never be the majority during the American Revolution. I hope you guys remember that. I've told you that several times, and we read that Howard Zinn chapter where he talks about never will the British colonists make up a majority of people who are in favor of revolution. We're going to be split: neutrals, loyalists, and patriots. Great point right there. We'll read the analysis, but I bet you that could be something that got them their synthesis point, or one of their synthesis point. All right, so they've used 3 documents. Despite these voices of opposition throughout the American Revolution, the colonists will eventually recognize the impossibility of mending their relationship with Britain and call for new American independence. For example, the reaction to the various acts put in place by Britain to raise money for the payoff of their debt involved colonial resentment that was felt all the way to England with the production of various protesting materials. That's document 1. That's the teapot. I don't know if you guys remember that teapot. If you look at the DBQ, it's an anti-Stamp Act. The message is printed on the teapot. They're talking about the colonists producing protest materials and making that connection there. The motivations and viewpoints of both the British and the colonists I like how they use that phrase, guys. Remember, not only are we using the documents to make an argument, we've got to figure out what the point of view of the document is, or maybe what the purpose of the document is. So when you use phrases like the motivation and viewpoints, that language helps the reader or the grader really understand that you've got this. If I'm using the language, the viewpoints of the loyalists can be seen throughout this document, you're fine. Anyhow, the motivations and viewpoints of both the British and the colonists did not mold or relate to the other. For context, the British thought it was only fair that the colonists pay for their own benefits that resulted from the end of the French-Indian War, while the colonists felt that they should be no taxation without representation. The opposition between their perspectives would only contribute to growing tension between Britain and the American colonies. In addition, colonists were used to a certain extent of autonomy, as seen as the declaration by the House of Burgesses that only their government can tax the people. Perfect use of that, guys. Remember local autonomy. We've talked all about how Great Britain might be technically in control of these colonies, but they do not interfere in local colonial affairs. They've got the House of Burgesses in Virginia and the Carolinas. They've got the Puritan town meeting all throughout New England. Now, granted, that's not that democratic. If you don't own property, you're not voting in that stuff. But, you know, at least it is locally run. It's not being run from the crown. That's another document appropriately used. So they've used 5 documents now, folks. They use one more document, they've got full credit on documents. Even before the American Revolution, colonists were already used to their own early forms of self-government that they did not want to sacrifice the way the Quebec Act forced the French people living in the Ohio River Valley had. This person has a very deep understanding. This could be evidence outside the documents, folks, right here. I didn't really even teach you about the Quebec Act. This person has a very, very deep sense of knowledge. The Quebec Act is not mentioned in any of your documents here, and I hardly even know what that thing is. But I'm telling you right there that the mention of the Quebec Act and the connection between what happened to the French colonists, that could be evidence outside the documents. Another example of the growing divide between the American colonists and the British people was the Enlightenment ideas of Locke's natural rights. You guys remember the Enlightenment. Here we go. Samuel Adams are beginning their calls for revolution against British control to protect their natural rights that the government is not protecting. Lastly, the Common Sense pamphlet. Remember, they're connecting Common Sense, Thomas Paine's pamphlet, to the Enlightenment. Will fire up the colonists by demonstrating in simple and changing language that British oppression must be met with revolution. The pamphlet eventually helps motivate the colonists to establish Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, which immediately heightens the conflict between the American people and the British Crown. How much more they got left on this? Last paragraph. Though the colonists were not all united under the desire for American independence, growing tensions over economic and political autonomy divide the British and the American viewpoints beyond repair and lead to the desire for independence in America. This revolution is similar to the French Revolution, which would occur. This is the synthesis point right here, guys. They're connecting this to a later revolution. This is a good synthesis point. This revolution is similar to the French Revolution, which would occur only years later in 1789. The French were inspired by the Enlightenment ideas that similarly motivated America, like Rousseau's government vision and the success of the American Revolution. However, the American Revolution ends with a successful establishment of a democratic government, while the French Revolution eventually ends with a dictatorship of Napoleon. Now, guys, was that like the most perfect essay you've ever written? No, this is a first draft. This is nothing that this student had time to prepare for. They wrote this essay in 1 hour with no preparation. When you consider that, that is a phenomenally well-written essay, considering there was no prep work, no revision, and no editing. Now that we've read a really, really good essay, let's read the analysis point provided by College Board. So scroll all the way down to page number 23. 23, it looks like this. We just read sample 1A, folks. We all can agree, if you were paying attention, that that was a relatively good essay. That got the maximum amount of points available on the rubric. Let's read why. They got their 2 points for their thesis, argument, and development. The thesis at the bottom of the first paragraph presents the historically defensible claim that there was a change in ideas about colonial identity, shown by the colonists shifting from wanting to be British to wanting to be independent Americans. Remember, guys, it's about a defensible claim. The strong, consistent arguments throughout the response earned the argumentative document point. Let's see. Okay, this is they're using this, guys, for because there's technically two synthesis points. One of them can be called synthesis. The other one can be called argument development. Argument development is where they got that point right there. So if you look down at the bottom, you'll see they got one synthesis point. Well, they got the second one up here in argument development. Anyhow, they are just simply weaving together a narrative, folks. They use multiple documents to prove that we're loyal British subjects. That's called argument development. If my claim is we're loyal British subjects and we just want to go back to salutary neglect, I've got to find several different documents to weave together a narrative that is based in reality. And that's what they successfully did. That's why they got the argument development point. Let's see what they got for document analysis. We know they got it. They used 6 out of the 7, folks. The document content use point was awarded. The response dutifully utilizes documents 1 through 6 to support its straightforward thesis. Document 7 is not used, despite a brief discussion of Thomas Paine's common sense on the last page, that instead counts as outside information. This was sufficient to earn the point for content. The document sourcing point was awarded since the response correctly sources 4 of 7 documents. They are also, guys, remember, it's not just using the documents, it's for at least 3 of them identifying like point of view. And remember, in their document or in their essay, they literally use the phrases Lady Shaw's point of view, the Patriot point of view, the British point of view, for example. That's how this student got those points. I think that's a really easy, consistent way to do it, by trying to adopt that language. Look at who the author is. If it's Thomas Paine, oh, Paine's common sense is that the Enlightenment ideas that we have, been looking at, such as separation of government, checks and balances or what have you, are worth, going to I totally just jumbled my words, but the point I'm trying to make, folks, is use that language, the viewpoint. If I'm reading Thomas Paine's common sense, oh, the viewpoint of Paine helps me understand that those people who thought like him really felt that revolution was inevitable since our natural God-given rights were being violated. That clearly articulates Paine's viewpoint. Anyhow, let's look down here for evidence beyond the documents. This response received the context point that was in that first paragraph by describing the French and Indian War and the increasing problem with debt. No problem. The response received the point of evidence beyond the documents as extended for the First Continental Congress that introduces several pieces of additional information and explains how they relate to the argument that the colonists did not seek independence. On page 1 of the discussion of the First Great Awakening does not relate to the argument and thus did not count as additional outset. So guys, remember how they talked about the First Great Awakening in the beginning part of their essay? The grader is actually saying that didn't count. They didn't buy their argument that the First Great Awakening is an example of our British loyalty. I was kind of questioning that myself. I wasn't actually sure what they were going to do with that. Fortunately, this student had so much other good information. Just because they had one example that was pretty weak doesn't mean they didn't get an overall good score. So they tried to use the First Great Awakening as an example to prove that we're loyal British subjects. But remember, guys, that's really not what the First Great Awakening is about. The First Great Awakening is way more about establishing religious freedom, about preventing any type of state-sponsored religion wherever you can. So that's really what the First Great Awakening is about. Not a great example of it as their loyalty. And then what about the synthesis? The response achieved the synthesis point in the last paragraph by relating the movement for independence in America to the French Revolution. Response notes that both revolutions were inspired by the ideas of the Enlightenment, despite very different outcomes. That was the first essay, guys. Go ahead and scroll up to, do you want to read one that gets a 4 or one that gets a 1? We'll just do one more. I don't want to bore you to death with this stuff. I want it to be helpful, not, do you want to read the really crappy one that gets a 1 or the medium one that gets a 4?
I kind of want to read the crappy one just so I know.
Yeah, the 1.
Okay, let's read the 1. And frankly, you guys have this document now, so you can read the 4 at your own leisure and read that. But cool. Let's read the crappy one, which is page 20. It is example C, page 20. All right. Before I jump into another long verbal tirade, guys, I need some affirmation from you that this is even helpful at all. Is it helpful to look at that and go through it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Let's do it. Oh, say again. I feel like I cut someone off.
Oh no, I was just saying it's very helpful.
Okay, let's do another one then. And if you guys do find this helpful, I'll do this, 3 or 4 more times before the AP test in 3 weeks. So this is the final one for the day. This is from obviously it's the same exact prompt, guys, same group of sources and everything like that. I'm telling you, this score is going to get a 1. Even though they wrote quite a lot, it gets a 1. So we'll read the document together, and then we'll read the analysis on why it got the score it did. Since the founding of the Americas and the North American colonies in the 1600s, most colonies tended to be loyal to Britain. However, as the mid-1700s came about, the colonists were beginning to become more and more displeased with the British government as their acts and legislation felt very oppressive for the colonists. As the British government began enacting more and more acts, the animosity for Britain grew until the American Revolution occurred. Essentially, the idea of American independence evolved from only a couple of supporters to a full-blown war against the British, as the colonists could not stand to be under British rule anymore. It's not how I would have worded it, guys, but that's not horrible. That sounds like a legitimately defensible thesis. They're essentially saying that, it starts with just a couple supporters for revolution, and then it goes to full-blown war against Great Britain. Is that 100% accurate? No, but that is a defensible claim. I can pretty much guarantee you that one's going to get the thesis point, even though I don't think it's worded very strongly. That's a defensible claim that they made, so that will get a thesis point. I didn't really see any context in there. They do have stuff about Great Britain's, these acts and taxes that are oppressive, but that's making their argument, guys. That's not really setting the stage with historical context. They're not telling me anything about salutary neglect. There's no mention of the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War. There's no mention of the debt incurred by Great Britain. So they're not really setting the stage. I would argue that when they're telling me about these oppressive acts in this opening paragraph, that should be saved for the body, folks. Those oppressive acts and taxes, that should be used to help me understand how we go from just a few supporters to full-blown war. So I don't know that I'd be mentioning them so much in here. I guess it's not appropriate to mention oppressive acts. At least they're not describing them. So I shouldn't harp too much on them. I just, I'm really nervous about because I have not read this one yet. I'm really nervous what their body paragraphs are going to look like. But so this is not the end of the world. I think this is a really, it's an acceptable thesis statement. I just don't see a lot of context. Second paragraph. During the 1760s, many colonists were split on who they supported, whether it was the British or American independence. The supporters of Britain were typically very loyal to their country and argue how they could revolt against the country who basically allowed the establishment of the colonies. The ones who wanted independence disliked the British government and felt that they had to establish their own system of governing. Okay, none of that is wrong, but it's not based on any documents so far. However, as the British government enforced taxes and other policies, the hate for the British grew as more and more people began siding with the revolutionists. Again, that's not necessarily wrong, guys, but that's really, really kind of vague in general. A teapot made during the late 1760s depicts this desire for independence from Britain as the object states, without the Stamp Act, American liberty will be restored. I don't believe that's really accurate, guys. I think that document's more about like supporting a boycott. It's an early teapot. It's a form of protest. Very few Americans are arguing for independence in 1770. So I don't know if they use that one correctly. In contrast, loyal colonists argued that imposing taxes on the inhabitants of His Majesty's colonies is legal and a duty of America, as America was a result of British actions. Yeah. Document 2, I don't know if they used it appropriately or not. It's really vague and really short if they did, but anyhow. In reaction to the growing ideas of American independence, as well as the British acts, various historical figures began arguing the rights that people are entitled to. Samuel Adams states that men have the right to leave a government or society if they find it intolerable to themselves and are allowed to enter another. Well, that's an Enlightenment idea. That's not a John Adams idea originally. Let's see what the analysis says. Adams might have said that, but it originally is an Enlightenment idea. Adams desires to blank the ideas of the colonists that are fed up with British rule, as well as advocate his desire to see American independence. Thomas Paine argues that an independence may be hard to obtain, but in the end will be well worth the fight, as freedom trumps any other consolation that Britain could offer. I just don't think that's what Thomas Paine says, guys. This person, they know a little bit, but they're not accurately utilizing the documents. They are summarizing what they think they remember. And they're not dumb by any stretch of the imagination. They're just not using the documents appropriately. Being free from the tyranny of British is the greatest goal that only could be achieved when men put their soul into the effort. That's kind of philosophical. He's not really citing a source with that. By the start of the American Revolution, the two sides were fairly basically divided, as many loyal colonists did not fight, while others joined the fight for independence. However, if one did not fight for the right for independence, they were typically ostracized or even had their plantations destroyed if they owned farms. Patriots had gone around to various farms and destroyed the items and land that people who did not support the cause owned, resulting in many assisting the war throughout of their own volition. So they worded that incredibly poorly, but I get what they're saying, guys. They remember that document where the Patriots have to essentially, they're stealing crops and they're burning crops of loyalists and they're trying to intimidate people to join the Patriot cause. They tried to use that document appropriately. I might give them the point if I was grading this. They just worded it really, really awkwardly. They're not really doing a good job making an argument, folks. The first DBQ we read, it consistently stayed on the same theme about how we remain, or we're originally loyal British colonists who are seeking a return to salutary neglect. This doesn't have that same cohesive argument. In conclusion, the idea of American independence evolved from one of limited support. This sounds good, though. The idea of American independence evolved of one of limited support to full-on animosity and hate towards the British government. And their acts and policies did not stick well with the American people. Well, that might be what he remembers, guys, but it's never more than 40%. Never more than 40% of colonists are patriots. And so I don't know if what he's saying is very accurate. It actually sounds a little bit exaggerated to me right here. But yeah, I don't know. The eventual liberation of the Americans resulted in the establishment of the Constitution and democracy, both of which gave equal rights for all white men and focused on the people rather than the specific elites, which the monarch had been. That's totally not true. We know that the Constitution does not grant equal rights to all white men. Certainly not women, certainly not people of color. So that I've got a problem with that statement right there. All right, guys, that certainly was not the worst DBQ I've ever heard or read in my life. They have some information, that I think was okay. I probably grade this easier than the College Board would, but let's see how College Board graded them. Scroll all the way down to, this is page 25, the last page. They're going to give us the explanation for sample 1C. Sample 1C. All right, let's see it. They did get a thesis point for their thesis and argument development, 1 point out of that. A historically defensible thesis is presented at the end of the first paragraph and again in the concluding paragraph. This earned the thesis point. There is not a cohesive argument that recognizes and accounts for historical complexity by explicitly illustrating relationships among pieces of historical evidence. Guys, that sentence, it's not very sexy, but that's the important thing. That's why this essay didn't get a good score. They did not account for historical complexity by explicitly illustrating relationships among pieces of historical evidence. That last essay did that really well, guys. They weaved together a narrative utilizing multiple documents. This person was kind of like just splattered all over the place. Even though they had some right information, they did not account for historical complexity by explicitly illustrating relationships among pieces of evidence. Well said. The attempted argument details in paragraph 2 and weakly describes the document in categories of loyalists and patriots. Yeah, what they said about, they're aware that there are loyalists and patriots, but the stuff they said about loyalist patriots were just not that accurate or way too extreme. But if you read that essay, you would think that everyone was a patriot by the war, and we know that's not even close to true. Ooh, look at that! They got 0 points for their document usage. The response did not receive the content use point. Documents 4 and 6 are not used. There is an error in the presentation of document 1 with the reference for the desire for independence. The discussion of document 2 does not present a clear understanding of the content. Documents 3, 5, and 7 utilize the contents appropriately, but does not meet the minimum requirement of 6. So they only got 3 documents utilized properly. The other ones, the grader did not count. No point was awarded for document sourcing. No attempts are made for any of the documents except document 3. That sourcing, guys, that's when you're doing point of view. That's where on the last one where they were very, very good at saying the viewpoint of so-and-so. This person didn't do any of that, so they got no sourcing for it. That's the FIA. Purpose, historical context, intended audience, author's point of view. That's the FIA. They didn't use any evidence beyond the documents. They had no example that was not found in the documents. And they had no synthesis point. Man, that essay was not, horrible to me. I don't know how I probably would have given them one more point for using documents. I think I would have found a way. Because remember, you can use 4 documents and get 1 point, but that one got 1. Just the 1 out of 7. Okay. Folks, talk to me. What questions do you have? No one stopped me in the middle of it to ask any questions about what we were reading. What do you have? What questions do you have for me about any of that stuff? I don't know how effective or how helpful this was. This is the first time I've ever done an online, DBQ walkthrough. So I don't know how to feel about it. Some of you said it was helpful, but talk to me. Give me some feedback.
I think it was good, just like with the saying like the point of view of this or whatever, just being like very straightforward, because I feel like, yeah.
Less is more with these DBQ guys. Less is more. You don't have to write, all this flowery stuff to fill it in. Go ahead, Dre.
Oh, I was just gonna say it was a good reminder for me of like what a good DBQ is, because a lot of the times when I write DBQs, I get really off track and like just like spew a lot of unnecessary information. And I feel like this is just like a good guideline for me, and like knowing what I need to include and what I don't need to include.
And guys, what some of you, especially those of you guys that are incredibly smart, and granted, it's like the same 20 people showing up, which is essentially every single person on this list. But you guys, you might get a topic where you know a ton about, and you just start rattling off random stuff that might be accurate. That is not the goal. The goal is to not list every single thing you know about a topic. The goal is to say, hey, here is the topic. I can make an argument about that thing, and I can use the documents that you have provided to weave together a cohesive narrative that supports my claim. It's not listing rapid fire, shotguns, blast. Guys, remember that document that got full credit, that got 7? They didn't even mention that much. They didn't mention Sons of Liberty. They didn't mention tarring and feathering of tax collectors. They didn't mention, I think they mentioned the intolerable acts, but they didn't say anything about closing Boston Harbor. There's a lot of details that stick out to me that they never even mentioned. But guess what? They don't need them, because they did not fit in with their argument about loyal British subjects. Now, they could have definitely used that stuff, but they didn't need to for what they said. So please don't think I've got to fit everything in. I've just got to write it. You don't. Think of an intelligent claim that fits the prompt and support it with the documents they've provided. I had one person ask me for individual feedback on theirs. Although she didn't turn it in yet. Erin's the only one who asked me to like read her DBQ and give her feedback. So as soon as she turns that into me, I'm going to do that for her. But does anyone else, if you want that, guys, just send me an email. You need to send me an email though. Don't verbally say do me, Mahoney. You send me an email and let me know, and I'm happy to give you some feedback on it. We can either meet live and talk about it, or I can just give you feedback in an email and tell you what I like about it, tell you what I don't. So that offer stands for anyone who wants it, folks. Real quick, I'm curious. I don't even know how many people I got to turn in that practice DBQ in 7th period. Oh, that's awesome. I had half of 7th period turn it in. I had Only one person in 6th period turned it in, and it was Addison.
Good job, Addison.
I had 13 people in 4th. Okay. And in 3rd period, let's see if they beat 7. I had 9 in 7. I'm sorry, I had 9 in 3rd period. So 7, man, 7 smoked everybody. 7 destroyed. Anyhow, folks, if you want me to grade your DBQ and give you personal feedback, happy to do it. If you haven't done it yet, it's not too late. It's not graded, folks. It's not for a score. You're all getting a credit. You're all getting a P. So right now you're just practicing because you're really trying to get a 5 on the AP test. Guys, this is really crunch time for you. If you guys really knock this thing out of the park, you might be able to, not have to take your freshman history class. It's a fun class. Don't get me wrong. You'll probably would enjoy it if you have to take it. But if you don't have to take it, you don't want to. It'll save you money, and you'll be stressed out doing all your other, classes that if you can avoid a random one, you'll like it. So, guys, that's what we're focusing on right now. You're not worried about grades or anything right now. That's what we're pushing for. You really, really got to kill this essay, and you can skip a class possibly freshman year if you kill this DBQ. That's what, just simplify it down to that. I can skip my freshman history class if I knock this DBQ out of the park. That should be pretty big incentive. Yeah, go ahead, Sneath.
I might have missed this at the beginning, but what's the translation now to having only 5 documents? Like, what's the minimum?
4. Use 4 for full credits.
Okay.
So and then the rubric looks exactly the same. You just use 4 documents instead of 6.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. They give you 5 and you use 4 for full credit. Cool. All right, folks. I don't think we've been on now for 40 minutes. I don't want to take anyone else any more of the time today. We're going to jump back into review tomorrow. And then, I think on Friday, probably, you don't have to write the practice DBQ. I'll post another one for you those of you that want to, but I'll just pull up another, student sample. So it doesn't matter if you wrote it or not. Like, you guys could have followed along today, even if you didn't write the DBQ. We'll do another one of those on Friday with a different topic. And then we'll just keep reviewing chapters in the meantime. So I don't know how effective this was. I think it was semi-effective. I give myself like a 79% today. But hopefully you guys at least got a little bit out of it. Even if it only reminded you about one thing, that's okay. Less is more with these DBQs, guys. Just do not write the entire story. You're not doing that. Make an intelligent claim, back it up with the documents they provide you. If you know the topic well enough, your claim will be smart, I promise you. Cool. Anything else before I stop recording? All right, guys. Well, I appreciate you being here. Again, 12:30